Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 and Avowed. For those wondering why all those games are paired together, it's because they share the same fantasy setting known as Eora. And so on this podcast, what we like to do is dive into the lore of this world, appreciate the writing that goes on for these games, help us, develop characters to play for roleplay in the games, or help develop games for tabletop role-playing, or just dive into nerdy lore because that's what we like to do. If you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here. I'm going to signpost you to episode 0, as I often do for newcomers, because it points you towards some of the more foundational lore if you're interested in learning about the basics of this world. But if you just want to get a flavor for this podcast, this is a good episode to start off in as well. We're not going to be going over anything spoiler-related today. We're going to be going through a number of the new weapons that were released in the latest 1.5 patch on Avowed. Now, I know I said last time I was not going to start a new file to find all the weapons so that I could read the lore that's in them, and I didn't. Technically, I didn't, but I did reload some saves on my speedrun profile that I created for Avowed, where I didn't talk to anybody, and I used that to kind of hop and skip over to vendors just to get quick screenshots of the items in the vendor thing. So I don't technically have the weapons on any of the accounts that I've made for the game, but I have got screenshots of the lore that is in them, and so we're going to be going through some of that today. As far as news goes for Avowed or Pillars of Eternity, the only thing that's worth mentioning at the point of this recording is that there's been a hot fix for 1.5 patch, so now there should be 1.5.1 is the latest patch that's out. The 1.5 patch, which was the major summer update for Avowed, released with a lot of issues, and people were having crashes and bug reports left, right, and center about the game. So this hotfix is supposed to fix a lot of that. I haven't tested a lot myself, but I guess we'll have to wait a couple days to see how well the hotfix actually works. But other than that, we can just dive straight into the lore for today.
Half the locals would arrest you for trespassing and the rest would kill you outright. I'm curious, what exactly did you find there?
So in full disclosure, I almost wasn't going to do an episode this weekend, but as it turned out, I did end up having time to record something. And I know this isn't the most, crunchiest of lore episodes to do, reading the lore descriptions or the item descriptions within unique weapons found in the latest Avowed update. But I do still like episodes like this because there can be little tidbits and nuggets of lore that are kind of hidden in the background, especially if you're aware of stuff from Pillars of Eternity 1. So for those not aware, in a lot of role-playing games, and Avowed is no different, if you have items in the world and you inspect those items in your inventory, there is often a description given about them. If you get an item called Merc Brew in the game of Pillars of Eternity or Avowed, for example, you read it, you come to discover that, it's just this fantasy world version of coffee. But for unique items, things that there are only one version of within the game, like unique weapons and armor, there's often unique lore or unique item description that goes with it. In Avowed, it often has to do with either the creation of this weapon or armor itself, or it has to do with the person who owned it, or it maybe tells some sort of story. Sometimes the lore can be really, really deep and implicating towards like something metaphysical about the world, and other times it's just an interesting story about the previous owner of said weapon or armor. And so in today's episode, I'm not going to go through all, I can't remember if it's like 15 or 17 weapons and armor to go through. I'm not going to go through every single new unique thing because that would be taking way too long of an amount of time. And a couple of them don't really have anything substantial to say that for the purposes of this show anyways, even though the weapons themselves are really cool and they're like the lore behind some of them are really interesting. As well, I haven't done this with all the other unique items where I just read them all, so we're just going to get a little bit of it. It's kind of spotlighting this new patch that Avowed released, and I'm excited to play with some of these weapons. Some of them sound very fun, so I'm looking forward to having a new build, but I'm still halfway through my other playthrough that I've been doing, so I'm going to finish that one first before I go back and try some of these new ones out. But yeah, so I'm going to go through them in no particular order, and I will mention the ones and talk about the ones that I think have some interesting lore behind them. If you are interested in one episode I have done about why unique items in Avowed and Pillars of Eternity could have unique item descriptions and it would be a lore-friendly thing, go ahead and check that episode out. I talk about the idea behind essence, which is the stuff souls are made of, being infused into everything, including weapons and armor. And so, like, to a certain degree, there literally could be memories implanted into these weapons and armor from previous owners, and that's why perhaps our characters in these games are able to actually take that information or that knowledge out of it. It's probably not the case, but that's how I like to imagine it. So one of the first weapons I'm going to talk about here is called the Grand Conductor, or I guess just Grand Conductor. This is a two-handed unique melee weapon. It's a great sword, and I believe you get this one from Galawain's Tusks, so it's one of the later unique weapons that you can get. And the item description for the Grand Conductor reads, "The Grand Conductor was part of an Animat bodyguard prototype created by Galvino, famed animancer and engineer. Due to the difficulty of obtaining large numbers of souls, along with the material expense in constructing the animats, Galvino abandoned the concept and turned to more practical inventions." As far as the gaminess of Grand Conductor goes, this is a unique greatsword. As I mentioned, it deals shock damage and can be enhanced to boost your attack damage and speed. So shock damage, if you're trying to build into that kind of a character, especially with two-handed weapons, and some of the things that it can do, when you kill an enemy, you are faster for 10 seconds, and then you can upgrade that to either like reduce your cooldown of fighter abilities or to increase your attack damage and your attack speed for a little bit longer. So if, depending on how you're building your character, if you're wanting to have big weapons but you're wanting to attack a little bit faster, this is perhaps a weapon to like build into. But as for the lore itself in the item description, I think the thing that stands out there, obviously, is this person named Galvino. So, Grand Conductor was part of an Animat bodyguard prototype created by Galvino. I guess I should start with what an Animat bodyguard prototype might be. An Animat is a type of enemy that we see in Pillars of Eternity, and frankly, I think Animats would have been a very interesting enemy to see in Avowed as well. Not entirely sure where I necessarily would have placed them if I was developing the game, but it would definitely be pretty cool. That being said, I guess a lot of the enemies from Pillars are pretty cool, and you can't have everything over there because it's a different kind of game. But regardless, there's an enemy that you can face in Pillars of Eternity, and they are created things, so they are not like a naturally occurring type of person or thing or creature. They're of the vessel category, which means they kind of fall in the same category as undead creatures. And essentially, the quick, easy layman's way of putting it is an animat is essentially a suit of armor that has been infused with essence, which again is the stuff that souls are made of, to empower the armor to essentially have its own consciousness, and it can be programmed in that sense to basically follow a base set of instructions, such as protect this place or attack intruders, etc., etc. It doesn't literally hold the soul of a specific person in the suit, and then that person is living on through the suit. Now, don't get me wrong, there is room within the fantasy of this world for something like that to happen, but very often when we see animats, the armor is essentially just being powered by the essence, to perform some basic programmed task. Like I said, guarding a tomb, for example. That being said, you don't want to just pick random essence out of nowhere. You do want to try to pick essence from people's souls that would be aligned to the programming that you want, right? So if you are wanting to create animats to guard your tomb after your death, then you're going to want to have essence taken from the souls of your most loyal subjects, because it'll be easier for that programming in a sense, right? Like these people will kind of already be loyal to you. They'll kind of already have that inclination to be that way. So that's kind of what animats are. You can't just like throw any kind of essence in there whatsoever. Then other crazy bad things can happen, such as they don't do what they're told, they go crazy, they're just violent, a whole bunch of stuff within the lore that can happen. So that's what an animat is. As for the person of Galvino, he is a character from Pillars of Eternity 1, the White March DLC in specific. He is an important NPC in the game in the sense that you do have to interact with him. If I remember correctly, to progress through the DLC, you must interact with Galvino in order to get to the big dungeon, the big place that you're trying to get to, open the key in the lock for. Galvino is someone that you're going to have to talk to. He's an engineer and animancer, and you can find him in Galvino's cabin over in the Durgan's Battery area of the DLC. Durgan's Battery is just a name for a location within this DLC for the first Pillars of Eternity game. Reading from the Pillars of Eternity fandom website, Galvino is a Valiant animancer who sought the privacy of the White March for his work. His first piece of work was Stalwart Village, which is a location that you get to go to in the White March DLC. She crossed paths with an important character that I don't want to mention right now, just for potential spoiler's sake, and ended up convincing this person, or other people in a sense, to work in the area on some of his animancy. A lot of his animancy, which again, animancy is the science of the soul within this world. It's the study of essence, essentially. So not just the souls of people, but the stuff that souls are made of, which can exist in, non-sentient beings as well. It kind of is infused with all living organisms and life throughout Eora. And that's what all animancers study. A lot of what he is trying to do is transfer a fully intact soul from a living subject to a fabricated body with no loss of personality or memory. So we were talking about Animats earlier and how it's just like you're powering the armor and you're not giving it consciousness. You're powering the armor with essence and programming it with a basic function. Galvino is trying to go a step further and literally transfer the soul, which has a person's mind and personality and memories with them. He's trying to transfer that into an inanimate object like a body of armor, where that person, the person of that soul, is continuously maintained through the entire process. And so you're essentially just transferring a person, essentially, from one body to another body, except the other body is not a living body at all. It's like, a suit of armor or something like that. So that's what his most sophisticated and greatest work is, and that's what he is trying to do. He's from the Valian Republics, which is the same place that many of the people from Fiorme Averno are from, including Giada, one of the companions from Avowed that you get to interact with. But we won't talk a lot about that because we're talking about Grand Conductor, the weapon that Galvino made for us, technically speaking. So this weapon was created by Galvino for a Animat bodyguard prototype. That's originally what we were talking about, right? And so when we read on here, we learn a little bit more about Galvino and what was going on with him. So he created this weapon for a prototype that he was building, but due to the difficulty of obtaining large numbers of souls, along with the material expense in constructing animats, Galvino abandoned the concept and turned to more practical inventions. So I don't know when in the timeline this item description is considering. Is it before we meet him in the White March DLC? Is some of the stuff after we meet him in the White March DLC? Did he eventually abandon the projects that he was working on that we witnessed in Pillars of Eternity? Or is this him turning his attention from basic animat creation to, I'm just going to see if I can put a soul into an object of any sort? But I'm not really entirely sure there. But we get a little bit of idea here about a little bit of a hint here about Galvino and that he had something to do with this weapon being created. How it ended up in the Living Lands, not really entirely sure, but these things exchange hands as they often do. The next item is a piece of light armor called Scholar's Advantage. It improves your proficiency with wands and wand-related abilities. So you get plus 10% attack damage with wands and increased wand range. It also increases your ability casting speed, which would, I think, extend beyond just simply like magical spells. It could be any kind of ability. So if you are building a character that is focusing on wands and you're using a lot of magical spells, this is something to consider if you're wanting to be quick about it. Now, the interesting lore written in the item description reads, traveling scholars from Broggan Hill Academy intending to carry out research in uncivilized territory, like the Living Lands, wear robes similar to this one, imbued with enchantments that boost their spellcasting abilities. The robe gives them an edge over rapacious bandits and unscrupulous academic rivals alike. So not a ton to dive into with this one, but I just think it's interesting to point out the notion of how people approach magic within this world. So you have traveling scholars from Broggan Hill Academy. Broggan Hill Academy is kind of what it sounds like and what is implied here. It is an academy that has scholars in it, but the academy in particular is well known for creating battle knights, mage warriors, if you will. One of the companion characters from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, the character of Aloth, actually attended Broggan Hill Academy, and that's where he learned to be the wizard that we know him in those games. And there's even a short story that you can read on the Obsidian website about Aloth and some of his experiences in Broggan Hill Academy. I often equate this to like the Eora version of the Hogwarts, but it's not quite the same. The flavor is different. The tone of Brogan Hill Academy is different. We never see it in game, and we don't get to read a lot about it, but it does come up every now and then within item descriptions. And I've noticed, especially in Avowed, there's a lot of item descriptions that have to do with Brogan Hill Academy, so I wonder if perhaps it was a considerable topic over at Obsidian when Avowed was under development. Maybe there was something in Avowed that was supposed to happen that had to do with Brogan Hill. Maybe there's some DLC around it. I don't know. But either way, it does get mentioned quite a bit in item descriptions for Avowed. But you have this idea of scholars traveling from Brogan Hill Academy to do research, often in uncivilized areas like the Living Lands. So it's no surprise that we'd find these robes out here, especially considering that Brogan Hill Academy is from the Aedir Empire, which is where a lot of the new colonists are coming from within the game of Avowed. And these robes imbue the wearer with enchantments to boost their spellcasting abilities. And so I think that's interesting how, like, it could be almost considered standard issue. Like, oh, you're a scholar from this place. Here, we'll get you some robes that have been imbued with magic. And I find that gives you a little bit of a flavor in terms of, like, how this world was developed and how it approaches the idea of magic and how accessible it is. Because you don't hear about these kind of robes being made for the most common person, but it seems to be something that people who are from Brogan Hill Academy just would commonly do. And I think that talks about the level of accessibility of magic within this world when, like, common folk aren't necessarily accessing it very easily or very often, and yet in certain places where people are studying it, it's common enough that just the average student, or maybe even little, third or fourth year students, whatever, can just have some of these things. So it seems like magic is more accessible than people realize it is, but it's just not necessarily the means to be able to study it. The next item I'm going to talk about is called Perseverance. This is a one-handed ranged unique weapon because it is a wand. It does not have an elemental damage type, but it can be enchanted to make full combo attacks deal high stun damage. So if that's the kind of build you're wanting to go for. So deal stun damage to nearby enemies when you do a full combo attack, and you can upgrade it to do more stun to nearby enemies, or you can make it deal a random type of elemental accumulation damage to an enemy that is hit. So if you're building a character that's focusing on stun damage but also using wands, this is one that you should consider doing, especially since you can get it earlier in the game. The lore in the item description reads, "The Archmage Arkemir is infamous as a distant and unforgiving master, and it's rare that a student parts from Arkemir on good terms. This wand was crafted as a symbol of solidarity among the apprentices, a symbol of their mutual hatred for the Archmage. The wand is battered and slightly sticky from being hurled against one of Arkemir's many imp servants on numerous occasions. As is traditionally passed down to the newest apprentice, how the wand ended up in the Living Lands remains a mystery." So this is always a fun topic, the Archmagi of the world of Eora. There's this circle of Archmagi, and they are the most powerful mages that exist within the world, and they have their hands and fingers in the most esoteric and enigmatic lore and knowledge and events that have happened in the world, and they're often responsible for some of it, and all of them are fairly interesting. Arkemir is one of the people in the circle of Archmagi. He's a very, very powerful mage, and we do actually get to see him in the second Pillars of Eternity game, and we learn he's kind of an ass. And you also learn that he takes on students quite often, and none of his students like him, as they mention here. One of his students, Facina, actually gets to be a sidekick character in the second Pillars game that you can bring along with you. And you can hear firsthand from her how much she dislikes Arkemir. He's a hard person to work under, but apparently there is enough to learn from Arkemir that he continues to get students despite this awful reputation that he has. He also likes to utilize the servant work of imps, which are a type of creature that exists within this world. I've done an entire episode on imps because they're fascinating and also a little bit grotesque. But yeah, they're essentially like these winged rat bat kind of creatures with a little enough intelligence to talk, but they're also really gross, and they kind of use farts to communicate to each other. I'm sorry I mentioned that on the podcast, but that's just the truth of the matter. So yeah, they're really strange creatures, and he utilizes them kind of as slave labor for his basic needs and stuff like that. Well, not basic needs, but just stuff around his lab and maintaining his house and things like that. And his students have to often work with imps, and they highly dislike him. And this wand, Perseverance, has got a little bit of imp gunk on it from being hurled at one of them. It's funny to continue to see hatred of Arkemir and his students brought into Avowed, even though we don't see him or interact with his students, just to see this weapon here that is kind of like passed on from one student to the next as they graduate from being a student of Arkemir's to the new apprentice. And everyone just seems to hate this guy. And I think that there is a brotherhood that forms around misery and stuff like that, or even just trials in general. It doesn't have to be misery, just things that are hard to do. I know some of my best friends that I've had in the world are people that I was like in the trenches with, like we were doing something that was really hard or something that we didn't like. And that kind of bonds people. I think that's why people make work friends really easily in different work environments where perhaps the work is hard or you don't like being there, or it's just hard to be at work because you'd rather be somewhere else or what have you. I'm not saying work is bad. That's not what I'm trying to say, but we all know, we've all been there, right? It's far easier to make friends at work, partly because you're seeing them, but also because you understand what you're going through with the job. There's a formed understanding in brotherhood and sisterhood that forms with that, and that seems to be happening with the students here with Arkham of like they all understand what it means to be a student of Arkham, and here is a token symbol of like our brotherhood together. Pass this on to the next apprentice when they come around now. But of course this one won't get passed on very likely because we picked it up in the game, and how it ended up in Living Lands remains a mystery. Perhaps one of Arkham's students was sent to the Living Lands and they lost it, or they were killed. We don't know. The next unique weapon is called Dealmaker. This is a unique mace. You can also get this early on in the game within Dawnshore, so if you're looking for a mace build, this is something to look forward to. It can be enhanced to make power attacks deal high bleed damage, and you can choose to upgrade it to either do poison or fire as well. So if you're primarily using power attacks with one-handed weapons like maces, this is a good one to look for and utilize. It does moderate bleed damage, so essentially your damage will continue to hurt the enemy after you've hit them with the power attack, and you can upgrade it so it does more bleed damage, and it either fire or poison kind of comes with it, so depending on how you kind of want to do that. Which is kind of honestly the same thing as bleed damage. It's just more damage after you've hit them continues to go, but the unique flavor of what kind, so if you're going to be fighting a lot of vegetation creatures, then fire might be a good option. If you're going to be fighting a lot of humanoids, then poison's a good option. It's just kind of how you want to pick your poison, no pun intended. As for the lore, the item description reads, this mace was the favorite weapon of Captain Anahera of the Rauatayan Navy. Well known for her ruthlessness and nationalistic pride, she eagerly volunteered to serve in the Deadfire Archipelago to pacify the hostile native Huana. Through her, tribe after tribe fell under Rauatayan subjugation, forced to accept unfavorable trade deals or to face complete annihilation. The captain met her end when her ship encountered an opponent that cared nothing for negotiation, a typhoon. Okay, so a decent amount of lore to cover here, and it's interesting to read this because as someone who has played through Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 quite a number of times, I'm very familiar with a number of these things, and I wonder for a person who is brand new to this world of Avowed, how many of these terms are going to be very familiar to you, especially since you get this in Dawnshore, the opening region to this entire game. Are you going to know what a Rauatayan Navy is? What is the Deadfire Archipelago? Who are the native Huana, etc., etc.? All right, so these are some terms that you might not be very familiar with. Now you can learn about Rauatai through the first companion you get in the game, which thankfully is in Dawnshore, of Kai. Rauatai is one of the major empires in the world. You have Adir, which is where your player character in Avowed comes from, and there was also Grand Valia at one point in time, but that has kind of collapsed as a long-running society and is now kind of taken over by the Valian republics, but that is a much newer nation or confederacy of city-states, if we're going to be exact. Regardless, the third major worldwide superpower that have existed for a long time outside of Adir and Grand Valia is Rauatai. Rauatai are especially known for their strong naval force because the land that they live in is very hardy. It's difficult to grow food. It's difficult to do anything. So survival is difficult there, and they've kind of relied on exploring the rest of the world and bringing resources back, which is why they have a rather strong navy, because they're exploring the world to help make their people survive. And having a strong navy has a strong military come with it, and having a strong military has kind of the attitudes that a lot of military tactics and proficiency that comes with it. And so this weapon, the Dealmaker, is one of the favorited of a person named Captain Anahera, which we don't know who this person is or anything outside of this, but we know that she was ruthless and she had a lot of nationalistic pride, obviously for the Rauatayan Navy. So she eagerly volunteered to serve in the Deadfire Archipelago to pacify the hostile native Huana. The reason this is important to note is because the Deadfire Archipelago is the setting for the second Pillars of Eternity game, and the Rauatayan Navy created this company, this force, called the Royal Deadfire Company. And the entire purpose of that was essentially to annex a lot of land in the Deadfire Archipelago for the purposes of growing food at a consistent rate that they could bring back to the Rautine people. So it was meant to help make their people survive, but they were trying to basically take over the area. And so the native tribes that were living there, the Huana people, were kind of getting displaced. It's an interesting story. If you want to learn more, I highly suggest going and playing the second Pillars of Eternity game to go learn more about it. We hear the end of this captain's story of subjugation when they were destroyed, or at least her ship was destroyed by a typhoon. Now, it doesn't say here whether the typhoon was created naturally or not, because the Huana people did have kind of a magic of water shaping that they had mastered. So, maybe they were involved in that somehow, but we don't really know. But either way, it's interesting to note. How this weapon ended up here in the Living Lands, not entirely sure, but I guess obviously the typhoon destroyed the ship close enough to a shoreline that this weapon was still able to be found. And with the number of people that defected from Rauatai or the Royal Deadfire Company to come to the Living Lands in Avowed, and you learn a lot about that when you get to Thirdborn in the area of Shatterscarp, it's not terribly surprising that a Rauataian naval weapon could end up here in the Living Lands. Now, how it ended up in Dawnshore specifically, we obviously don't know, but it's close enough. They probably came to Dawnshore first and then moved on after that. Who knows? But either way, that's a little bit of the story that happened there. I guess it is fair to mention that it is in the store of extremely legal goods, which is obviously a store for not extremely legal goods. So perhaps it was acquired through illicit means. Now, I would like to talk about more of the weapons and armor that we see in the game, but unfortunately, like I said, I almost wasn't going to do an episode this weekend, and I didn't have a ton of time, so I'm going to actually stop here, and if I can record another little bit later, I'll include it and put it in, but this is where I'm going to stop for now. And I also don't want to just read the lore for every single item that you find from the 1.5 update. I want you to explore some of this for yourself. So if you have been replaying Avowed after the 1.5 update, and especially now that the hotfix is out, and you find yourself getting some of these new weapons, I highly recommend going into the item description, leading some of the lore, and asking yourself, do I understand everything that they're saying here? Some of them, it's just very basic story of this weapon was made by such and such, and this is how it works. But there are some things that talk about locations, like the White That Wends, for example, and they're because there's a frost hammer that you can get, and it's really cool, and there's a lot of things that are mentioned there. If you do find any of those things, look into some of that lore, or live in this world a little bit, and maybe even use that to help build a roleplay for a character. If you're wanting to roleplay a pale elf, even though you can't be a pale elf in Avowed, but if you're wanting to roleplay as one, perhaps that's a good weapon to use, because not only is it a frost damage weapon, it's also a weapon that comes from the White That Wends, or has ties to it, which is the ancestral home of pale elves. See, so that's just a roleplay example I'm giving you. But regardless, I want you to check some of those things out. And if you find any weapons and you are new to this world and you have questions about what is this or what is that, please send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com, and I happily have conversations about some of this stuff that's going on in the game. I have conversations with a lot of people, especially about endgame stuff, about what do we think the end of Deadfire means for the world. And, honestly, I should probably do a really big episode on that. But regardless, anyway, so, yeah. With that said, let's close up today's episode.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
All right, so I'm joined by my son for this last part, so we'll see if he cooperates here. We're going to close out the episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode. I know it wasn't the crunchiest lore, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, but I still find a lot of stuff interesting to go through, and I think that it fills in a lot of little nooks and crannies of the lore of the world and helps it feel more filled out. And if you're interested, hopefully you'll look into more item descriptions. If you like today's episode, you want to hear more like this, or you have a specific topic that you'd like me to touch on, please send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. If you're interested in following the show on Twitter, you can do so at worldofeora. I mostly just post updates on shows, but it's a good way to stay informed if anything important comes up. Lastly, if you do want to support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. I don't expect people to support the show in that particular way. It's just there for people who find value in doing that for things that they enjoy consuming on the internet. But if you would like to support the show, but not in that way, you can engage with the platform that you're listening to this podcast on, like Spotify, by commenting on it, or if you're on Apple, you can, I think, leave a rating and review. And that just helps the algorithm put the show into the hands of other people, and it really helps out in that way. As for what I have been playing lately, for those who like to have conversations about games that they're experiencing together, I have pretty much just dove full into Grounded 2. For those who have listened to the show for a long time or know me personally, you'll know that I really love Grounded 2. In fact, my boy here, he calls it... See, my boy here, now he's piping up. He knows that it's called the bug game, because I play it more than often enough around him, and he even likes to play the bug game. But regardless, that's really what I've been diving into a lot. And it's great to get back into a new Grounded, even though it's a lot of just the old Grounded, but just in a new place. It's interesting to see what Obsidian is doing with it. I haven't progressed very far, but I've been having a lot of fun just, doing the Grounded thing. I'm excited to see what Obsidian does with it through early access and to finally get an ant that I can drive around this huge map. Man, this is a big map. You want to try talking, buddy?
This?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, this. What is this for?
That's for talking into. Do you have any thoughts about Grounded, the bug game?
I like the bug game a little time.
There you go. Anyway, so yeah, I'll stop talking about that. I'll talk about it more in a future episode. But that's everything. Thanks everybody for listening to today's episode, where we just looked at some of the item descriptions for new weapons and unique armor that came in the 1.5 update. That's everything I have to say for the show. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
I'll see you next time.